following the final rest day of this year's Tour de France, we're going into the final week.
I think we're moving down to the Alps. We've got two very, very difficult stages in the mountains in the middle towards the end of the race. We've got the Queen stage on stage 17 and stage 18, which is the final summit finish of the race, which ends on the Col de Peyresourde, which is first time the race has ever finished on that climb. And then we've got a time trial in Marseille, the penultimate stage of the race, which could be quite decisive before we reach Paris.
Stage 16 starts after the second rest day in Le Puy-en-Velay and finishes in Romans-sur-Isère. It's 165 kilometres long, and although it looks pretty hilly on paper, you think it might be a sprinter's day?
Well, I think they're classing it as a potential day for the sprinters. I think the last climb comes before 2/3 of the way through the race, so before a third of the way through the race, sorry. So there is time definitely for the sprinters to recover. If the likes of Lotto, Quickstep, they've got such strong teams, you'd think that they'll be trying to protect their riders. There's not a huge amount of chances for the sprinters before Paris, so they're going to want to try and take any opportunity they can get to get a stage win again.
I think so. If there's a sprinter still in the race with a strong team behind him, they can definitely control a stage like today. There is a climb up onto a plateau, but then they descend about before halfway through the stage. They descend down, then it's more or less flat for those kind of guys all the way to the finish. So if there's a sprinter who wants that win, he'll put his team on the front and bring back that break, and we'll see a bunch finish, I believe. Stage 17 of this year's Tour de France is La Meure to Serre-Chevalier through the Alps, 183 kilometres. And Oliver Bridgewood knows all about this stage. You rode it.
I did. I rode it with Cadel Evans, actually, of all people.
Clang, name drop.
I know.
Did you beat him?
Up the Quad Affair, and then I don't think I saw him again once we hit the Telegraph.
But this is a big day through the Alps, isn't it? Some pretty tough climbs.
It's absolutely massive, yeah, and it's touted as the Queen stage of this year's race. And it begins by going up the Col de Ornon. But the Quad Affair, if there is someone who is by this point, a couple of minutes down, who is, I think, in trying to make up some serious time on GC, there's potential on the Quad Affair because of its very nature. It suits someone who can attack because there's the small sections where it goes downhill and then steep back up. So someone who is punchy could potentially use that as a launch pad to attack in a number of locations on that climb.
I'd suggest that anyone who attacks on the Col de Quad Affair is going to lose minutes today, because you've got over 30 kilometres of climbing from the Valley Floor up the Col de Telegraph, then a small descent into Valois before you start climbing up the Col de Glibier, which peaks out at over 2,642 metres, probably the highest point on this year's race. It usually is the Glibier.
The key thing to point out with the Telegraph and the Glibier is that although on paper it's two climbs, the descent off the Telegraph is so short and happens so fast for the pros that it's basically one massive 34-kilometre monster climb that they've got to tackle. So I expect to see some absolute chaos happening there and people really losing out.
Yeah, I think this is one of only two kind of big mountain stages now, so we're sort of entering definitely the final phase of the race for the climbers to really kind of show their hand and do what they need to do. If anyone's behind in time, people like Quintana, he'll need to do something on a stage like today because they've only got tomorrow's stage up to the Izoard to actually take any time back really on a significant climb.
Stage 18 starts in Briançon and finishes up the Col de Peyresourde.
A beautiful climb, another alpine stage, but not too tough. You've only got a Cat 3 and a Cat 1 climb before the Izoard, so it'll all be about that final climb. The first time they finished at the summit of the Izoard, they normally go over it and drop down into Briançon for a finish.
Yeah, this is the final summit finish of the race, only the third summit finish that we're going to have, so it's only the last chance really for the main climbers to really do anything on that final climb. They will all be looking at that one to make their final move before we start heading towards the time trial.
The time gaps by this point with this stage and the Queen stage the day before are going to be so significant that you think it's going to be decided here and this is going to be it.
Yeah, I think the time trial will come down to seconds. It's not that long, so I don't think riders will be able to take minutes back in a 22k time trial. So this stage could be massively decisive. If anyone gets a big gap, they should probably and could keep it all the way to Paris.
Stage 19 is 223 kilometres long from Embrun to Salon de Provence. I mean, if the previous two mountainous monsters weren't enough, we're now faced with 223 kilometres of
what looks like pretty hilly terrain. So
yeah, I think this is quite interesting one. You sort of expect the kind of big fireworks showdown to be the last or penultimate stage of the Tour de France. The fact we've got this stage sandwiched in between the Col de Peyresourde and the time trial, I think could be quite interesting because it is lumpy and it is quite hilly, and it'll be interesting to see if this kind of takes any effort out of the GC guys before the time trial.
I think it's really, I suspect it'll be a day off for the GC guys sandwiched in between the mountains and the time trial. It could be a sprint. It's got the final kilometres set up a sprint, but whether or not there's any teams there wanting to control it for that, that's what it'll come down to. If not, there's a lovely little Cat 3 climb about 50 kilometres out there, and that's the perfect launch pad for a break if there's no one interested in keeping control.
Stage 20 is a 23-kilometre individual time trial through the streets of Marseille, and it's the last opportunity for anyone on GC to make time differences. So
I think it's only 23 kilometres long, so it's not going to be, I think, too many time gaps, or I don't think it's going to be minutes, it'll be seconds, I think, that riders will be looking to get on the stage. But it's very technical, it's through the city, so I think it's quite twisty and turny. I don't think riders are going to be able to massively open up their power. They're going to be kind of stopping and starting and going through all the corners on a stage like this. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see the gaps between the GC riders at the finish of this stage.
And there's a punchy little climb about 2/3 of the way through, but it really depends on what the time gaps are. The race might be done and dusted by now. If they're small, this is going to be a great little stage because everything's to play for. But so we're just waiting to see what we come into it.
Stage 21, we're finally there, the final stage of this year's Tour de France. Again, by this point, the yellow jersey competition will be decided, and it will just be a procession down into Paris, into the Champs-Élysées.
Yeah, the only thing the yellow jersey has to decide is how much champagne he's going to drink riding alongside the commissaire's car on that slow little jaunt into the centre of Paris. We know the format. They take that very, very slowly, pose for pictures, bit of a celebration, and then all hell breaks loose as they hit the Champs-Élysées for the first time.
And Richie Porte is going to be fearing this stage more than any other stage of the race, because if he has won, or if he's on a winning team, when they pose for that photo where they have to ride no-handed with their other teammates, he inevitably
on cobbles
always falls off, or nearly falls off. So
you heard it here first. What we all know we look forward to in Paris is the final big sprint, and who is going to take that final sprint.
I think we've seen the last few years, the sprinter has always kind of dominated the race. It'll be interesting to see whether we get that on this stage this year. If it is someone like Kittel or Greipel that's got 3 stages maybe, or 4 stages by this point, if they are going to win again, or if it is going to be that sprinter that's maybe not got a stage win yet that is going to kind of sneak one in right at the end just before the race finishes.